Record. Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. Ever since I read Atlas Shrugged, I've been intrigued by the idea of the producers getting fed up with being regulated and being bilked out of their money. And I recently read an article about something similar taking place in Norway. So I've asked the author of the article on the show. He is the managing editor for fee.org. That's the Foundation for Economic Education. And he's had articles in Time Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and other prominent publications. Jon Miltimore, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you. I'm doing great. So tell us, what is going on in Norway? You say the wealthy are leaving. Is this a mass exodus? And what is the impact on the Norwegian economy?
I wouldn't say it's a mass exodus. What I'd say is it's a mass exodus of the super wealthy. So what you have here is a small number of people that in 2022 decided they were going to leave. It was, several dozen people, upwards of 30 people, that were billionaires and, hundreds of millions, that they had. And they said, okay, goodbye. And if you look, I first read about this, I think, in The Guardian. And The Guardian had the story, and they noted this is more people, super wealthy people who left Norway than the 13 previous years combined. Think about that. Like just in 2022, more in that single year than 13 years combined. And so, like, to me, I'm curious, like, okay, how did this happen? And it's not a big mystery, why these people decided to leave. Norway is one of those few countries that still has a wealth tax. Like Americans are pretty comfortable with the idea of an income tax, right? Like, we might not like it, but we understand it. If you go to work, like, some of your income is going to be taxed. Usually the more you make, the more you're going to pay on that tax. Now in Norway and these other countries, again, there's a handful. Spain's another one. I forget the others in Europe, but they're taxing wealth. That means that just for having, the fortune of living in their country, they're going to take some of your wealth that is just sitting there. You might not even be working, but you have a certain amount of money, and they're just going to tax your wealth. And what Norway did is they've had this tax for years, but they increased it. They increased it to 1.1%, I think. And people are like, wow, that's not a whole lot, right? Like a wealth tax, we're only talking about 1%. Well, don't forget, that's year after year. Every year, you're going to be paying 1% of your total wealth. And I looked at just one of these individuals who has, a name that's a Norwegian name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I'm going to mangle it. But he's a fishing magnate, made billions, in the fishing industry, and then kind of diversified in other stuff. And he just announced, I'm taking me and my capital to Switzerland. His name, maybe I will try it. Hans Jurka. Jurka is the last name. It's spelled Rokke. I did some, pronunciations listening to it to try to, I still probably mangled it. But he was just one of these guys that said, I'm not going to, sit around here and get taxed and have my income taken. And it was an open letter he published, and he didn't say it quite that plainly. But that's, when you get down to it, that's the situation. A bunch of people in Norway, really wealthy people, said, yeah, I'm not going to just stand here and let you take the wealth that I've earned.
What is the rationale for this wealth tax? Because if I'm hearing you correctly, a wealth tax isn't based on how much money you have coming in, or maybe for money that you've inherited and they take it like in the estate tax or from a sale or anything like that. You're just talking basically about taxing capital, right? Like the savings somebody has. If you're worth X amount of money and that money is somewhere, they're going to take a percentage of it, right? That is what they're doing, correct? And what is their justification for it? Like, what's the reason how do they sell this to the public?
Well, first, yeah, that is basically it. They're going to look at your house. They're going to look at your total net worth and say, okay, you owe us this. And the justification is, well, the state wants more money, right? They have all these programs. We need to fund these programs. We got to try to get revenue every way we can. income tax, as you say, the estate tax. We have all these, sales tax, all these different ways that we're going to collect money. And I think the appeal of the wealth tax is kind of obvious. Like, again, there's a lot of people in our country, in the United States, at least where I am. I forget where you're based out of. Are you U.S. as
Connecticut.
well? Connecticut. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of people. Elizabeth Warren is one of them, and there's others who are really, high on, aggressively pushing, a wealth tax. And the appeal is you have some people that they have too much money, right? They have so much. Well, you have to share that with others who are less fortunate. And so you can see there's a great populist appeal. People, people might hate taxes, but they don't mind it so much when it falls on other people. And that's sort of like, well, they can increase the taxes on those millionaires and billionaires. They have too much anyway. And I think there's a couple lessons to learn from that. I think one is there's the political appeal of that. We see it in our politics all the time. It's sort of like this class warfare, right? Like the politics are very appealing. I have friends, you probably have friends that think, like, oh, you're just for the rich guy. We need to support the little guy. We need to support the little guy who they're always, after. And things like this have great political appeal with them. And they show like, oh, Joe Biden is really fighting for us. I saw a speech he gave just the other day. He was, railing how millionaires and billionaires just aren't paying their fair share. And so things like a wealth tax are really, appealing politically to people. They want to push that. Now, I think you have to look at how a wealth tax actually works. And, as I talked about in this article, and the Guardian pointed this out as well, the wealth tax that Norway passed is now collecting about 40% less revenue because you had all these people that say, to hell with this. I'm not going to stand here and let you just take my money. I'm going to go to Switzerland, or I'm going to go, to the United States, or I'm going to go, wherever it is. There's all kinds of countries people can go to. And that's a reality. Capital has never been more mobile, right? Like, it's so easy now to just say, no, I'm going to move, and I'm going to move my capital. I'm going to take it with me. And that's a wonderful thing. For people that like a wealth tax, it's not wonderful, right? They want that money, and they get very frustrated when people just take it with them. But when it comes down, when the rubber hits the road, that's what you have to look at. Norway is collecting less revenue now, a lot less revenue, with their wealth tax that increased. And I'm sure a lot of listeners probably are familiar with like the Laffer Curve.
I was
right?
just going to ask you about that. You preempted my question.
Yeah, so the Laffer Curve, which actually goes way back before Art Laffer, who was an economist in the Reagan administration. We have an article on FEE about this. It actually originated, I think, with an Islamic economist from like the 13th century or something like that, and it just shows there's a sort of middle area where the state can collect the most money, but if you're too low, obviously, if you're a tax rate at zero, you're not going to collect any revenue. But if you go too far in the other direction, you're going to collect. If you have 100% tax, you're also going to collect zero revenue in the end, because you're not going to produce anything. There's no incentive to produce, and this is why we see it. There is that sweet spot where where all the people that are supportive of taxes like this say where you can collect the optimal amount of revenue. But if you go past that, you can reach this point in Norway, seeing this, where you increase taxes, you're going to collect less revenue, because it's going to cause people to leave, or to not work, or and to do these things. And so this is a great example of backfire economics. You increase a tax expecting more revenue, and you end up with a lot less revenue, hundreds of millions of dollars, less revenue for Norway each year.
See, when it comes to the Laffer Curve, I agree with the economics of it. You raise the price too much of anything, and people are going to buy less of it. And if you raise the taxes too high, people are going to work less, because they don't want to have to keep expending their effort for somebody else. But my issue with the Laffer Curve, we had a gubernatorial candidate who was making the argument based on the Laffer Curve, about setting the tax rate right to maximize revenues. But from my perspective, I don't want the state maximizing revenues, right? I want revenues to be as low as possible, especially when you're talking about, taxation, which is, compulsory. But I want back to Norway for a second. Norway takes in a lot of revenue from oil, correct?
I all kinds of streams. I couldn't tell you how much they get from oil, but I know that they have, it's a significant amount.
Because it just seems to me like government is insatiable, right? They no matter how many revenue streams they get, they're always going to want more. And is that what's happening in Norway? That there's just a appetite for more and more government services on the part of the people who aren't paying the bills. And the best way to get those services is to tax the people who are paying the bills. Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, and I would say it's not just Norway. I think if you look at most Western countries, that's the case. You can certainly see it here in the United States. We're what, $32 trillion in debt right now, right? And I think that's one of the reasons this story is so important. There's this fiction, we go back and forth. You have Republicans and Democrats that argue about this, over and over and over, where Republicans say, oh, we just have to, reduce spending. And Democrats say, no, we just need to increase taxes more. Like, we all agree that the debt's bad, but nobody can really agree. I think we need to realize that this fiction that you can just squeeze more money out of the wealthy, it's not going to happen. Okay, people are not going to sit there and let their wealth be taxed. People are not going to, like if you increase your income tax like to 60, 70%, it's not going to do what people think. And this is where Republicans and Democrats both need to get this. It's not just about cutting taxes. Okay, Republicans are really all about, they love tax cuts, right? They're always going to, we've seen it in the last 25, 30 years, like not a lot of push for spending cuts, right? You need to do both.
Well, when they're out of
just to go,
office, then they push for the spending cuts.
yeah, no, exactly. But going back to the Laffer thing and your point about maximizing revenue, I agree. I like Milton Friedman's approach to this. In Friedman said, if you pass a tax cut and revenue goes up, you haven't cut taxes enough. And the point there is, yes, like taxes, you want to tax enough where revenues go down, and you want spending to go down with it. And we're so many countries are just heading in this other direction. United States being one of them. We're now entering this era where we have just $1 trillion deficits every year, and we kind of seem to think that is just cool, right? Like we can manage this. Long term, we're not going to manage this, and long term, the situation I think is pretty serious. And we will reach a point when we're not going to be able to maximize, bring in more revenue. It's going to be more and more money printing, and this inflation we're seeing now. Like I think there is this belief, like, oh, this is just a blip from COVID where we printed $3.5 trillion in 18 months. It's going to go away. I don't think that's going to be the case. We're seeing inflation taper, but I think inflation will be just part of an ongoing issue in our future because we don't have any way to control spending.
So, has there been any that you're aware of historical analogies to what's happening in Norway where people in a given country just got fed up and began leaving? I mean, I would imagine people were leaving communist countries. Obviously, we see them coming over in inner tubes from Cuba, but the countries, they don't really let their people just leave. So I'm talking about where the people basically had freedom of movement and just decided to leave countries. Are you aware of any historically?
I think if you look most of Europe, right? Like if you look at how the United States became a country, I mean,
Good point. Good
I
point.
think religious persecution was part of that. And I like that was part of it. But people just wanted more opportunity, and they, Europe, was a lot harder to succeed. So you hadn't, just wave after wave after wave of immigrants who came to America for more opportunity. The problem is now, like when people say that America was the last frontier, it was, like that's kind of where we're at. And now America is becoming what Europe was, this place where it's not growing, where it feels like it's slowly dying, where the administrative state is constantly taking more and more and more. And now there's not some other place we can go to, unless Elon Musk is right, we can colonize Mars, right? Like, in God willing, like that'd be great. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. But yeah, that's sort of the nature of human history. The state grows and starts taking more and more, and humans, go to other areas where they can, because there is a desire for freedom, right? Like people don't like it when they're being oppressed, where they can't practice their religion, or where the state's just taking too much from them. Um, but now, the United States isn't the bastion of freedom it once was, right? I'm not saying that we're not the USSR, we're
No.
not East Germany. It's nothing like that. But we have some serious problems here, and it starts with bad economics, and this idea that you can just, you can build a culture that's built on confiscation, right? That's built on plunder. And we're gonna plunder those who produce in society and take more and more from them, and give it to others and spend it in all these other ways, and things will be just fine. That's not a culture that will ultimately produce a healthy, prosperous society.
Other than the debt and inflation, which you mentioned, what policies in America right now do you think are similar to those that are causing the problems in Norway? We don't have a wealth tax, at least not that I'm aware of, but certainly we have policies over here that are pushing us in that direction, right? So what are some of those policies?
Partly, I don't know enough about European policies or Norway policies to say what's similar. Um, I do think a lot of it, just speaking very broadly, the bureaucracy is growing in America at a very, unhealthy clip. And it's bureaucracy that's largely, I'll go off on a tangent a little bit. Like, there's economic costs from that, but there's other costs too. And we're seeing it now, like, where, bureaucracies meddling in things they're never supposed to meddle with. We're seeing bureaucracies that are kind of out of control. They're now, like, I'm old enough to remember when the Department of Homeland Security was created, right? And it was like one of those, I remember at the time, like, well, this isn't good. Like, what are they, there's no wake of 9/11, and we're kind of, just passing everything. It's a war on terror. The whole Department of Homeland Security looked a little fishy to me, but it was passed. Well, now you have it's DHS that all of these speech regulations are being cited. The Defense of Homeland Security Act. Okay. All these things we're fighting to preserve democracy here, and that means that we're going to actually start to, actively work with companies to decide what can be said publicly and what can't, what undermines democracy, what doesn't. If you look, there's no mention of free speech anywhere in that act. Not one mention of it. But they assumed the authority to start doing that. And that's what we've seen in recent years. I think it started in probably 2018. The bureaucracy just said, well, it's our job to kind of decide to fight misinformation and disinformation and malinformation, that's one that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. Malinformation is where, well, they said something that's true, but it's going to end up with a result we don't like, right? Like what they might have said about, masks or vaccines might be technically true, but it's going to discourage people from using masks or vaccines. That's malinformation. We needed to talk about how to stop that. And I know that's kind of a tangent from where we were, but this is all stuff that is kind of just been recently unveiled, with like with the purchase of Twitter and the Twitter files and all that. You have bureaucracies that are kind of, like I said, out of control, doing things they were never, legally authorized to do even. And a federal judge, listeners probably heard it, like, he came and just swatted them down for this and said, no, you can't do that. But we'll see if the bureaucracies actually listen. Like, do you think, and the Biden administration has already appealed that ruling. And I assume most people know that the background of that. A couple of states, I think it was Louisiana, Mississippi, sued on that front and said you can't use companies. The federal government can't basically outsource censorship to private companies, which is what it's been doing. So, like all of that, I think it's just one of the most overlooked problems in America today. We have this massive, bureaucratic state and not really held accountable.
So, in your view, what are the chances that in America we could have a brain drain, or what are the chances that in America Atlas will shrug? Is this a realistic possibility that's something? I mean, I don't think it would happen on a, where everybody just stops working, but it seems to me it could happen to a point where it was a problem. What do you think the chances of that happening, if it's not already happening?
Yeah, no, I think it already has happened to some extent. Where people just say, like let's face it, and this can happen in different forms. A lot of people don't work today because it's simply easier not to work. And I that always to me, I think this is something that separates like I'll just say like regular Americans or capitalists and Marxists. Marxists look at work as bad. It's all exploitation, right? You're being exploited. That's why we work. I always looked at work as good. Like work has improved who I am as a human being. It's made me a better person. I've taken from jobs more than just a salary. I've learned how to interact with others. I've learned all these soft skills about working with people. Work has improved me. But again, I think you do have a lot of people that say work's just exploitive. It's bad. So if people don't want to work, that's okay. I don't look at that as good. I think work is something that sharpens human beings and makes us better. And I think it's tragic today that we see like the labor participation rate, now it increased a lot, when when women hit the workforce. But if you look at the recent decades, it's just been a slow, steady slide. So that's one way, people can shrug. I think you do see, and there's probably more to your question. I think what we're seeing now is it's happening between states. We're seeing people fleeing California, fleeing Illinois, fleeing New York, and some of these other states. And it's very, I wrote an article on this a few months ago, actually. If you look at the IRS data, the people leaving these states are the wealth creators. They are the entrepreneurs. And they're the people that are, have the highest incomes. And they've reached a point that says, I don't want to live in California anymore. Like, I'm tired of being taken advantage of. I'm tired of, paying more and more in taxes. I'm tired of like there's the tax component. There's also the part of Atlas Shrugged we forget. Societies become corrosive when plunder becomes normal, and we're seeing that in a lot of these. If you look, the parts of these states at least are really falling apart. You have a lot of violent crime, and you have the schools are in shambles, and I think people with the means are and again, IRS data supports it. It's very clear. They're going to places like Texas. They're going to places like Florida. So I think in the United States we're not going to see tons of Americans in the near future to say, oh, I'm gonna go to Canada or the UK. Let's face it, other countries have pretty similar policies, but I think you will see it from a people voting with their feet to leave states and municipalities that have insane policies and confiscatory policies that make it really hard to succeed because the state's intervening in your life so much as it's hard to improve your situation.
In your article, you took an interesting spin, or an interesting turn. I don't want to say spin, that I rather enjoyed. You talked about the Nobel Prize winning economist Robert Lucas. Can you tell us, well, who was Robert Lucas? What is the Lucas critique, and how is it relevant to this discussion?
Yeah, Lucas is a guy. I'll be honest, I didn't know a ton about him. His name had been familiar to me for years. But Peter Jacobson, an economist that writes for FEE a lot, just did a piece on him recently. Lucas, was a University of Chicago, economist, and the Chicago school is kind of like the legendary school, right? And he passed recently, and Peter wrote a very nice article about him. And it occurred to me the Lucas critique really is part of it, connected really well with what was happening in Norway. And the Lucas critique said, look, human action, all of it happens at the individual level, right? And we do all these macroeconomic models, and we draw up these plans, and we assume it's going to do this, and we assume this is going to happen. We saw a lot of this with COVID, right? We had all these vast assumptions, these models that we assumed were going to happen. Well, the models were horribly wrong with COVID, and the macroeconomics were horribly wrong with Norway, because it said, oh, we're going to increase revenue by 30% or whatever it was. And in fact, it did the exact opposite. It led to a collapse in revenue. And the Lucas critique at it just says, you can't assume people are going to do what you expect, because when you change policies, people will change behavior. Okay.
Sure.
And that's a very simple idea. But he won a Nobel Prize for really showing, and not just presenting the idea, but showing how it applies to our everyday life. And I think that, to me, is the coolest part of economics. Is a lot of people hear economics and they think things that don't apply at all, like stock markets, or they think graphs and charts and supply and demand charts, and that's part of it. But the cool part of economics, to me, has always been human action. And it is that people make choices. And look at the word economize. We do it in our lives all the time. We look at it and say, well, if I'm going to do this, I can't do that. And a simple thing like opportunity cost, and the way that economics applies at the micro level, I've always been fascinated by and interested by it. We do it all the time. Like we plan our day without thinking. Like during the middle of my day, I'll go and I'll make lunch and empty the dishwasher, and I do 3 or 4 tasks at once when I'm out there for 15 minutes. And it's saying, like, I could do all these things individually, but you're kind of doing them all at once in a way that, why do I do that? Because time is very important. It's a resource like anything else, and you want to maximize time. You want to maximize all these different things, and most of us do this subconsciously, right? Like, we don't really think about it. I never really think about it, but you realize it. I think at least successful people are really good about maximizing their time and maximizing their resources. And so then you apply that to a macro level. And to me, it was very arrogant to think, oh, we're just going to crank up our tax on wealth and get a bunch more money. It's going to be great. And never assume that people might be like, whoa. I'm not gonna sit there and have my feathers plucked and not do anything about it. And so I think anybody listening, like think about that. It's one of the basics of economics. Don't think about when you hear of a policy, don't just think what the policy is intended to do. Think about all the other things that it might do that we can't even think about. And I think once you approach life with that way, you start to realize, like, oh, humans are complex, systems are complex, and it's not this simple little formula that we can just kind of plan it and make it do what we want. When you do that, when you plan societies like that, you have all kinds of things that crop up, and you often end up making matters worse. And there's a great Chinese philosopher that was writing about this 2,500 years ago, and he was articulating the idea. He didn't call it this, but the idea of spontaneous order. And it's like, if we just get out of people's way, people can actually do a lot more than we get them credit for, right? Like, if we just let people, let them seek on their own, let them thrive on their own. But the moment you start to plan lives for other people, I think all kinds of things happen, and a lot of it is negative. Just another quick example, like go back to the war on poverty, something, Lyndon Johnson waged all these years ago. If you look, you can pull up the charts. Poverty in the US was just declining rapidly. And then we declared war on poverty. And what happened? It skids. Poverty's going nowhere now. Like it's barely budged in the 4 or 5 decades, 6 decades. It's getting further now since we passed this policy, right? And we've only started spending more and more on it, trillions of dollars, thinking we're gonna conquer poverty if we just spend a little bit more. and it hasn't worked, but nobody wants to admit that. And I think it's very arrogant to think like, okay, if we just get the right policies, we can create Eden on Earth where everybody has enough. That's not the way humans are. And like it's I think even those who are good intentioned, like really they look and say, I just want, we need to use government more effectively so people have more. They're not looking at all the unintended consequences in the lives you're many times you're ruining by making people, to quote what Benjamin Franklin said years ago, making them easy in their poverty, right? You don't want people comfortable in their poverty. You want them trying to succeed and better themselves and improve themselves. And that's not all through material well-being or anything. I don't want to imply that it is.
It's
But again,
certainly
some
a
of this
large
is,
part of it, right?
I think I think it is a big part. But I think there's also, I think, I don't remember if it was Thoreau that said this, used the phrase poverty of the mind. I think we do suffer from that a lot. And like, materially, Americans today have, even, do we have inequality? Sure, but we have so much, right? But I do see today like this poverty of the mind, like people, they don't appreciate what they have. And like I think most of us are, in some ways we have too much, like in some senses, in one sense at least, people would say we have conquered poverty. People today, they don't starve in America. Like our biggest problem is obesity, right?
Yeah.
Like in the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be obese.
You mentioned unintended consequences, and there's a lot of different definitions of economics, but one of my favorite is the study of the unintended consequences of human behavior. And I read a story, and I don't know, it might be apocryphal, but I like the story because it illustrates the point. And it's that there was this town, and they had a problem with snakes. There were too many snakes, so they made a law, and they said, "Well, if you will kill the snakes and turn the snakes in, we'll remunerate you for them." And they thought, "What a great idea! This will get rid of the snakes." But what actually happened was people started breeding snakes because now they know that they can make money from selling the snakes to the local authorities. And it's just that you never know when you enact these policies how people are going to respond to them. And it seems like they have a knack, the government that is, for and getting the exact opposite often of what they actually want and what they want to achieve. I mean, Norway, when they passed the wealth tax, they're not trying to get people to leave. They want to raise more money. Instead, they get less money. What policies do you think in America that there's a realistic chance of passing in the near future would help stem this dynamic that we have of the ever-growing government that's basically, I mean, it's a wealth killer, really, right? And it's a happiness killer. You talked about well-being. What can we do in the near term, at least, that could help with this, if anything?
Yeah, no, just to go back a minute, what you're describing, the Cobra effect, it's called, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
I think it was the British, Empire. They were in India, and I think it's a true story. I did try to verify that. I looked enough to say I do think it's real. And yeah, they had this bounty on cobras, and it was working for a little while, but like they thought, because like, oh, look at all we're getting all these bounties, and then they realized what was going. People were breeding cobras, but you left out the best part of the story. So afterwards, they figure out, oh, people are breeding cobras, turning in bounties, and they're getting, they end the bounty. And guess what happens when they end the bounty?
People release the cobras into the into the
So
wild.
you have more cobras than ever. Yeah, well, we don't need these anymore, and they release them, or some I'm sure were just killed. But yeah, like I think your point, it's a great one on incentives, and this is something people don't think about. Think about the incentive of the policy you're passing, not what you want, not what you hope it does. Think about what the incentive it's actually creating. Um, and I'll answer your question in a minute about policies. But like I think we're seeing this right now. I wrote some articles on this, is the shoplifting stuff, like the way California in particular, but it's not just California. I saw as well, like companies in other parts of the U.S. They're discouraging people from stopping shoplifters. And I think what they don't want confrontations. They don't like in California. They're actually trying to pass a law that would make it illegal for employers to tell employees to stop or confront shoplifters. And I think the danger is you are creating an incentive for more shoplifting, right? What's going to happen when people realize they can walk into stores, take stuff, and not be stopped or not, or even questioned? Like to me, think about the incentive of that. Now, I
Sure.
know what people are saying when they're saying, oh, we don't want to have violent confrontations. Okay, like that's why we're doing this. We don't want employees that aren't security guards trying to stop people. But think about what's going to happen. You're going to create more shoplifting. And it's already a huge problem in some. We've seen companies like Walgreens just leaving, shutting down in San Francisco, and they're not the only ones that are just saying, no, to heck with this. I'm not going to, we can't make it when people are just coming and taking stuff. As far as policies in the U.S. go, I don't think we should be thinking about, oh, what policy we can pass to fix things. Policy does matter, and there are, but I think what we need more is a shift in mindset. And
Okay.
the shift in mindset is that we need to stop thinking about government as a force that can improve our lives. And this is something that infects both Republicans and Democrats. They really think, okay, how can we use government to make the lives better for people? And I think if we approach these problems with that mindset, things are only going to continue on the trajectory they are. I think we need to go back and remember, view government the way the founding fathers did, and most Americans did for most of American history. That government is really a necessary evil. Now I know I have some anarchist friends who say no, it's not necessary at all. It's just an evil. But I'm a minarchist. I'll say it's a necessary evil because I do think there is a role that government needs to play in any sort of functioning society, because people do aggress against one another. You need government to kind of settle those disputes.
Yeah.
But this for most of American history, like government. If you ask people the purpose of government, you got a pretty clear. It's to protect our life, liberty, and property. That's why we have it. Somewhere in the 20th century, it became accepted that the purpose of government is to provide for people. Like, I ask this question sometimes to progressive friends to kind of just get their own thoughts going. Like, what do you think the purpose of government is? And they will say oh, it's to provide for the people. Well, no, that whole mindset is wrong. But that is I bet you if you polled Americans, close to a majority would answer to provide for the people. What the people don't realize is to provide for the people, you have to confiscate from someone else to do that. And
Yeah.
you're building a culture based on looting, of taking from one person to give to someone else, to provide for others. Government doesn't do, let's be honest, government doesn't do these things well. The only thing it can actually do well, I think, is wage war. And it's one of the things that we don't want government doing at all. But this is, if you look at why the 20th century was so bloody, the bloodiest century in human history, it was because of this mindset. I think that people looked at government as a powerful a force for good, and one that was going to usher in a better culture for the German people, or one that could build a workers' utopia in the Soviet Union. All those mindsets need to go, and we need to look at government as a pernicious, evil force that should be limited in every way. And until we go back and Americans kind of start to see like, oh yeah, government's bad, like it's making our lives worse. We're not gonna fix any of these issues.
So the lesson for today: government sucks.
Here, and it's a simple argument, but it's easy. I mean, if you look around at like at the world today, I think there's so much evidence for it. The problem is the government is very good. So much of what it does, it's done to justify itself, right? To make
Yeah.
itself like look important, and politicians are very good at it. The bureaucrats are very good at it. but I think COVID is a great example, right? Like look, for the last century, we didn't try all that lockdown stuff. People said, oh, it'd be a disaster. We've reached a point where like, yeah, let's lock everything down. Like this makes sense, and we saw what it caused, and it was a disaster. But I think that was one of the lessons to glean from this COVID-19 pandemic is the faith in government is really, really high, dangerously high.
Yeah, and could have devastating repercussions. So, John, where can people find you?
Yeah, all of our content on fee.org, like we publish there every day. I just think we produce great content, so check that out. I also have um, a Substack myself, and I publish there every day. It's called The Take. Uh, Probably JJ Milt. I think you can find it that way. But maybe I'll send you a link you can drop in the chat or something afterwards. But
Okay.
Substack is great, and it's just one of those places you don't have to worry about being censored on Substack. Like that's kind of one of the reasons I started it. Not that I get censored at fee, but all of the social media platforms for a while there were everything you said you had to worry about it. But so to me, like for people not on Substack, check it out. You can just receive content from your favorite authors in your email, whether they publish every week or once a day.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. For now, this is Michael Leibowitz, the Rational Egoist, signing out. Remember, like, share, comment, subscribe. Till next time.